It is 100% accurate. You are afraid because you don't know. And the way you eliminate the fear is by conditioning yourself to do the research and analysis to know. I'll give you a perfect example. I, as you know, a few years ago, made a commitment to move up the food chain in my network and the people that I know and the people that I'm connected to. You've heard the story of how I did it. You'll read about it in the book, You Need More Money. I go in detail about how I went about it. But I literally moved up the food chain in my network. And by doing that, you get introduced on more deals. And I was brought in on this private equity deal. It was brought to me that I could invest in this private equity fund that invested in small healthcare companies, very specific criteria. And once the criteria hit, the fund would make the purchase of the business, and I had the opportunity to get involved with the guys that were running the fund. But I didn't know anything about private equity, nothing. So what's the first thing I started to do? My research and analysis. I didn't take my buddy's word for it. Just because he had made money on round one and round two, both had become fully subscribed. In other words, round one was fully funded, round two was fully funded, and I was being offered round three. Now, hear me on that. Just because they had success with round one or round two, no correlation that they're going to have success in round three. I was a little bit late to the game in that capacity, but I was late in building my network. So that's what happens. You get some of the sloppy seconds, or in my case, the sloppy thirds. So I immediately began to research and analyze what the hell goes on in the private equity world. How do these guys make their money? Because I went to cooking school, man. None of that stuff was taught. No one was talking about private equity at my kitchen table when I was a kid. No one was talking about it with my clients or in my network of people. So I had to educate myself by the research and analysis. You're going to hear me say it 1,000 times on this podcast. Fear is connected to the unknown, and the unknown originates because you have not done the research and analysis. So I started to read. I started to watch YouTube. I literally started to type in, what is a private equity deal on YouTube? I used Google. What is a private equity deal? What are the basics of private equity? How does private equity work? Literally super simple searches. And then I began to talk to people that I knew were in the private equity game. Now, I wasn't talking to the guys that I was being offered the private equity deal with. I was talking to the other people outside. They didn't know these guys that I was interested in doing business with in a private equity fund. But they knew private equity, and I would ask them this question, and I would suggest you ask this same question. Would you explain it to me like I'm a 6-year-old? I know it might sound rinky-dink, and you might be afraid to ask like that because it makes you sound stupid. But I'm telling you, if the person you're thinking about doing business with or looking to get advice from cannot describe the business model like you're a 6-year-old in super simple terms, I'm out. I have a pretty good sense of business. I have a very in tune, street smart mindset towards business, but I don't know the terminology or the jargon or the lingos. And so I don't want to be told the jargon or the lingos. I just need to know the basics. If $1 of revenue comes in, how much is the expense and what's left over? And when money's left over, how does that get divvied up in a private equity deal? What is the plan of the private equity fund? What are you guys looking to do? Are you looking to run these businesses? If so, tell me what happens to the profitability. By the way, the businesses that are in the private equity deal, how do they make their money? What problem do they solve? What niche are they in? Who are the competitors? Like a 6-year-old, man. Business like a 6-year-old. Don't be afraid to ask that question. Would you do me a favor? Explain it to me like a 6-year-old. And the good people will be able to do that. Trust me when I tell you, the snake oil salesmen are the ones that are going to use the jargon and all the baloney when they describe their product or their offering. The really in tune ones will describe it to you like you're a 6-year-old because they know their business inside and out. Then the last thing you got to do, and what I did on this private equity deal, was I went to the private equity guys and I said, I think I know a little bit about your business now. I've done my research and analysis, but would you guys do me a favor? Explain it to me like I'm a 6-year-old, please. And they did. And I was ridiculously impressed. And I invested. Now, my private equity deal that I did was $1 million investment, but it was broken up into smaller increments. So my first investment had to be $100,000. And then I had to commit over time to invest up to $1 million in the fund. And so the big component to that is, do you have cash? So after you've done your questioning, could you explain it to me like I'm a 6-year-old? And you've done your research and analysis, and the fear begins to be removed, because that's exactly what happened for me as I began to really understand how the private equity game got played. It began to make sense to me. I actually began to understand that, wait a minute, it's not this complicated thing. You know what it is? It's pretty simple business. These guys get a bunch of money together. They try to find businesses that make sense, that have some sort of strategic alliance, i.e. possibly a roll-up. Like one of the deals I did was they're rolling up these healthcare companies in an effort to make small healthcare companies go bigger, and then they want to exit. They want to sell to a large strategic partner. I got it. Makes sense to me. I don't need to be for it to be called a roll-up. It's basically you're going to buy businesses until the businesses that you now own get to scale. You'll ensure the profitability because they have a very clear niche and you're better than the competitors and they're throwing off cash. That cash, which the real fancy private equity guys will try to call it EBITDA. Well, I don't need to know it as EBITDA. I just need to know it as, is there cash? Yeah. Well, what's the multiple of the cash? 6 times. Great. So if the roll up, if each of the businesses that you guys roll up make $1 million a year, and you roll up 10 of them, and now you have a $10 million net profit coming into the group of businesses, and you have a 6 times multiple, well, you could sell it for $60 million. Well, if I put up $1 million in $100,000 increments, how much of that is mine? And they told me the answer. And I said, well, if it sells for $60 million, I get that percentage back to me. Yeah. Well, then I said, well, is that more than $1 million? Shit, yeah. Should be 3 or 4 times that based on my investment. I'm in. Sounds pretty good to me. It doesn't have to be overcomplicated, folks, but if you don't do the research and analysis, you're screwed because you will be stuck in fear. And the fear will keep you from pulling the trigger 100% of the time. The other thing you have to do once you start to do the research and analysis, you have to begin to understand what is your risk tolerance. Like, what part of the business do you like or do you dislike? I'll give you a perfect example. I have a commercial real estate investments in which I invest in commercial apartment buildings, right? I don't want to rent to anybody. I don't want to interview the tenant. I'm not interested in the repair and maintenance. I'm not interested in evicting anybody. You know what I'm interested in? Putting my money in and getting paid every single month. I want my distribution. That is a determination of my risk tolerance. Because the person who does want to do the other stuff, they want to find the deal. Maybe they want to negotiate the deal. Maybe they want to develop the deal. Maybe they want to handle the renting of the property. Maybe they want to handle the maintenance of the property. They want to handle the marketing of the property, the accounting of the property. They're going to get paid more because they're solving bigger problems. I don't like that piece of commercial real estate. I like to put my money up. I like to get paid every month. And when the property sells, I like to make a multiple above what my investment was. Very simple for me. That is my risk tolerance. Now, some people look at my business and think it's an unbelievably risky business, right? We're loaning money, although they are good credit customers, they're small businesses. And they buy equipment that travels the roads. So one day the truck that we finance might be in Miami, the next day it might be in Los Angeles. A lot of people consider that extremely risky. Well, how do you find your piece of equipment? Well, how do you know that you're going to be able to get your piece of equipment back? I have such a mastery of my business that is not risky to me. I have no fear in that. It's a part of doing business. But I didn't know that about private equity. I didn't know it about commercial real estate either. So you got to do the research and you've got to do the analysis. Now, the last component is you got to have some cash. So you've got to have that vehicle, that platform, that goose that lays the golden egg, in which you have the discipline To reserve capital from that, you must force the profit margin out of that goose that lays the golden egg. Otherwise, it isn't a goose that lays a golden egg. It's a dog with fleas. So you got to hear me on that. If you have a business that is not profitable, you don't have a goose that lays the golden egg. In fact, you have a liability and you have a dog with fleas, but you already know that about your business. Your job is to fix that, man. Turn that business into a goose that lays the golden egg. Otherwise, get out of that business. Get out of that career. If you have more month at the end of the money, time for a change, my man. So, rule number 1, you got to do your research and analysis so you clearly remove the fear. Rule number 2, you got to determine what your risk tolerance is. If you want to be the developer of commercial real estate, knock yourselves out. I don't like it. I'm not interested in spending my time finding those deals. I'm going to let other people do that, and then I'm going to put my money, I'm going to ride their coattails, and I'm going to get paid less of a rate of return than they will, and I'm perfectly comfortable with that because the research and analysis told me I'm not good at that stuff. I got a business that I have to be involved in. I can't be involved in all these other businesses that I don't know much about. I can only stick to my knitting. The number 3 is you got to have the cash. So the goose that lays the golden egg has to spit out cash. Now, I talk about this at length in the book, and I've talked about this on the podcast. You have to create a reserve account. So when I started my reserve account in my business 15 plus years ago, I said this business is going to generate a minimum of a 10% net profit margin before tax. Every dollar that comes into the front of this company, the top line, the front door, every dollar that we receive, 10% of that is immediately siphoned off and put into our reserve account. I've been doing it for the last 15 years. Of course, I do it in my personal life as well, and you need to as well. I talk about it at length in the book. The reserve account is what forces your business to become a goose that lays the golden egg, that gives you free cash flow, that gets put aside in this reserve account off to the side so that when the deals come and you do your research and analysis, you have the cash so you can do number 4, which is pull the trigger. Pulling the trigger is the hardest component of it all because we are afraid that we are going to lose. We are afraid that if we buy that piece of property, that we're buying at the peak. If we buy that stock, we are buying at the peak. And I'm telling you, we're in America. Over time, good business will do good business. Good properties on the right location with the right management team with a supply and demand situation that's in your favor will do well over time. The same thing applies with stocks. The same thing applies with private equity. Whatever your business is, you guys know your business better than I do. But if you know the business and you've done your research and analysis, you will begin to remove the fear, which allows you to understand your risk tolerance. By having the goose that lays the golden egg that throws off cash, you now have your cash position. And then number 4, you're in a position to pull the trigger. And when you pull the trigger, a lot of times you're thinking about, well, how am I doing with the money? Let me tell you one thing that I've found with all the people that I've done these deals with, they don't want to hear from you. In fact, if you're the person that's calling them once a quarter wanting to know updates on it, they don't want to be bothered by that, man. They want to be left alone to do their deal, unless you're deeply in the risk side of it with them. If you're the developer, you better be talking to them. If you're the rental agent, you better be talking to them about how are we getting people in here. If you're the marketing team, you better. But if you're just a passive investor like I like to do on a lot of these deals, man, I never talk to these guys. They send me the reports. I look at them. If I have any questions, I'll give them a call, which I rarely do because they're performing beautifully because I trusted the guys. I did the research and analysis. I picked the right people to play with. And you just count your money. And then over time, when it grows, you'll make a big hit. You'll make that 2 or 3 or 4x on your investment, and that's the way you get rich. Everybody has to have investment opportunities that have a chance to make a home run for them. In my business, we make our money on singles and doubles, 1Z, 2Z, 3Z truck deals, and every once in a while we'll do a 50 truck deal. That's the home run for us. And in my private investments, I make my cash flow every month. I never bother the guys. I make sure that the math is still working out and the opportunities look good over the future. And then every once in a while, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 years down the road, you'll get a call that says in the private equity deal, hey, we're liquidating and your piece is 4X. That's the home run. But you don't get there unless you actually begin to understand where the fear comes from and that you do the research and analysis to begin to remove the fear. Condition your brain that when you are afraid, it means that you have not done enough research and analysis. I cannot stress it enough. It was the biggest game changer for me on how I changed my money situation. When I stopped being fearful, start conditioning my brain to recognize that fear equals unknown. Unknown is fixable and controllable by research and analysis. Have the goose that lays the golden egg, and then have the balls to pull the trigger. I'll see you down the road.